This is the Chris Stigall Show podcast.
Okay, guys, let's just rip. And Chris Stigall.
Chris Stigall. Chris, thanks for being with me tonight.
Chris Stigall.
I'm joined now by Chris Stigall.
Now, he puts the broad in broadband. It's Chris Stigall.
The Chris Stigall podcast is presented by usmedicalplan.com. Save big money monthly and get better health coverage at usmedicalplan.com.
Well, it's Wednesday, middle of the week. Thank you so much for downloading the Chris Stigall Show podcast. Mando, I appreciate you so much, more than you know. I have to say that in this day and age, I was just talking with an associate today, and the way things are going, places like this podcast, places like the Harump Society are probably going to be, when it's all said and done and all the lights are shut off, this is going to be where I live for the rest of my days. And so the fact that you have made this a destination, the fact that you download this show every day, the fact that you've left a written review and a 5-star review if you're an iTunes or Spotify user, I'm sorry if it sounds redundant or your eyes glaze over. Yeah, Stigall, you've said it 1,000 times, but I mean it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for turning this podcast into something that 4 years ago I could not have imagined. And, you know, we've crested so many tens of millions of downloads since. And it's all because you make it a destination and you download it every day. Thank you for subscribing to it so you don't miss it. And man, have we got a good one for you today. The professor, Alan Dershowitz, will be here today. By the way, this is a guy that has never voted for Trump. Never once. Doesn't support Trump even a little bit politically, but defended him during impeachment and has said now that this potential indictment coming is wholly absurd. And he lays out the case as to why. So it's a great conversation. You're not going to want to miss it. Also, James Rosen. I'm a big fan. I don't know if you've seen his work in the White House press briefing room. He works for NewsMax now. He was with Fox for a number of years, and he was the one that kind of first, the whistle was blown by even mainstream media that he was being spied on by the Obama DOJ. Remember that story? So Rosen's here. He's got a new book on Justice Scalia, the late, great Justice Scalia, of whom I'm a tremendous admirer. I bet many in this audience are too. We'll talk with him about that coming up. Now, John Ruhlman is the guy that makes this show possible, and I don't know about health insurance for you. I don't know if you get it through work. If you do, you might be inclined to say, I'm good. Maybe, or maybe you could save hundreds of dollars a month. Maybe you could save thousands of dollars a month. I had this great conversation with John, and I'm going to put it up on our website soon so you can see the full thing. But I wanted you to hear some of it. I interviewed John about a lot of different questions. And so, like I said, I think it's going to be worth your time. But if you haven't called or gone to usmedicalplan.com yet, usmedicalplan.com, and I'll put it up here on the screen if you're watching, usmedicalplan.com, or call 877-410-4321. I asked him, I said, look, John, I'm the kind of guy who, I'm not going to make waves if I've got something in place and it's working. I don't want the bureaucratic nonsense of trying to get out of one insurance plan and get into another. John makes it super easy. He handles it all at usmedicalplan.com. But I said, I don't know, is there ever a bad time? Is this like a bad time of year? Do I need to wait? And here's what he told me.
I mean, I'll tell you right now, you should know what you have.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the first and foremost. And most people don't. They don't know how it's going to protect them on their worst day. And that's what we're paying for, right? So I say you need to do it at any point in time when you don't feel comfortable. If you don't know exactly what you have and clear how it's going to work, you should call us, because and there's no open enrollment time. I can change your coverage at any point in time, adjust it, make changes. We do it all the time. I have clients that change their plan every couple of years because they're constantly moving or doing something different, or business grows a little better. They want a little bit more coverage. So the only time there's an open enrollment, Chris, is when the government says you can buy their plans.
So there you go. That's just some of what he told me in this conversation. Give him a ring. It's 2 minutes, and it could save you thousands of dollars. You won't believe the money people save. 877-410-4321. Better coverage, cheaper rates, 40 to 60% savings. My gosh, it's a no-brainer. usmedicalplan.com. All right, so Tuesday came and went, and no Trump indictment. Oh, damn. Will it be today? Possible Trump indictment, what to watch for. Trump arrest, watch day 3. I don't know. Andy McCarthy said yesterday, he said that the DA wouldn't do all this work and put all this time in and make these moves if, in fact, this isn't coming. I saw reports yesterday from people inside this DA's office those who are tied to New York law enforcement who are saying that inside this DA's office, even Democrat DA staffers are telling this wackadoodle that's the Manhattan DA, dude, this is outrageous, and we can't, you can't indict a former president. We're not, don't do this, or we're out. They've already apparently had mass resignations or threats of resignations in the Manhattan DA's office. And so it's he's getting, pressure from obviously the Democrat Party, and maybe he aspires to something greater in the Democrat Party, and that's what matters to him. So maybe that's why he does it. But reportedly and supposedly, and you always hear this, that rank and file members of law enforcement are upset about it. So I don't know what's true about that. That's all gossip and hearsay. But supposedly there are a number of people that are fighting tooth and nail and saying, if you do this, this is so beyond the pale. We'll walk, we'll quit. There would be mass resignations and mass chaos inside the DA's office. I don't know how much of that to believe, but that's what some who are in the know there that I know are reporting. So we shall see. But they are still over at the Hill. They're incredulous that Trump is fundraising off of this. And I wondered to myself, why would you be surprised? I told you, I think if he could have it his way, he'd have the mugshot now. Like, he probably called the DA's office and said, any way you can indict me? I'd really like that mugshot. Former President Trump taking advantage of his possible indictment coming this week by sending out numerous fundraising emails asking his supporters to donate to his third presidential campaign. Alvin Bragg, Manhattan DA, signaling that he is prepared to bring charges against the former president. Barricades being set up around Manhattan's criminal court as our nation awaits an announcement on whether President Trump will be indicted, said one fundraising email. The email added that Trump knows true vindication will come on Election Day 2024 when he says he will take back the White House. The email asks for donations, urging the supporters to send a contribution to the Trump campaign at this critical moment. If media leaks are correct, this could be the last time I write you before a possible indictment comes. So I want to take a moment to thank you for all the support you've given our movement. As news of Trump's possible indictment grips the country, the former president taking the opportunity to rally his supporters and members of his party, many Republicans have flocked to Trump's defense, decrying that the probe is politically motivated. Why wouldn't he? Wouldn't you? I'd fundraise the hell out of this thing right now. I don't find anything unseemly about it. It makes total sense to me. A couple of other things I just wanted to call your attention to today, not because I think they're related. I know by presenting these stories, it's going to sound like I think they're related. I don't know that that's true. I don't have any evidence to suggest there's any relationships to these stories. I just found it interesting that they occurred at the exact same time. Well, the exact same day, I guess I should say. Not the exact same time. Two different fires. Two different fires in two different religious settings. I just had that story, and where'd it go? Hang on, stand with me here. I just had it. Well, let's start with this one. New Jersey church fire. Florence Township, New Jersey. A task force of county, state, and ATF officials will investigate what caused a massive 8-alarm fire at a New Jersey church. The daylight revealed the extended damage to the Fountain of Life Center, located at the 2000 block of Columbus Road in Florence Township, New Jersey. The fire broke out around 6 o'clock last night. Officials tell Action News that kids were playing basketball in the rear of the church when they reported seeing smoke. It didn't take long before the building was completely engulfed in flames. According to Robert Tharp, fire administrator for the Florence Township Fire Department, more than 150 firefighters responded from across South Jersey and Pennsylvania to help put out this. This is a massive building, by the way. Officials with the church are planning to hold Sunday services in a recreation area of the property that was spared by the flames. A K-12 school next door to it, not damaged, but classes have been canceled for the rest of the week. Okay, so that's one story. from yesterday. Massive structure. This is a massive religious institution in New Jersey. Up in flames. And no real reason why. Nobody can really figure out what caused it. Then I happened to see this, interestingly, and it caught my attention, that there was another big fire, this one a little closer, in a Philadelphia Catholic school. Our Mother of Consolation School. Again, don't misunderstand me as drawing conclusions. I just think it notable. It's just interesting. Is it not? Because religious institutions don't just burst into massive, massive fires often. Doesn't happen a lot. And when it does, we all take notice. When two of them happen in the same day, I take notice because I watch the news for a living. A 3-alarm blaze broke out Tuesday afternoon at Our Mother of Consolation School in Chestnut Hill. Appears to have completely destroyed that building. The official compared the swiftness with which the flames swept through the building to the fire that engulfed the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. An old building with heavy timbers like that, the fire sank into the building so fast. The only injury in Tuesday's blaze was to a firefighter. School was dismissed at 2:45. So this fire happened yesterday afternoon, apparently started in the attic, and it sounds like the sanctuary of this massive church in Florence Township also started. The roof of the building collapsed. So look, you know me, I'm not trying to draw any parallels. I'm not trying to connect any dots. I'm just saying I think it notable and interesting that two houses of worship erupt in flames in the same day. Is there anything to it? Don't know. Just calling your attention to it. Also interesting to me, because these are things I pay attention to, more dolphins washing ashore. 6 dolphins euthanized after washing ashore in a mass stranding at Sea Isle City Beach Tuesday, just hours after 2 others had died. The stranded dolphins were found at 11 a.m. Police officers were joined by local rescue squad members who covered the dolphins in blankets to form a single bucket brigade, pouring ocean water on the dolphins for hours as marine mammal rescue centers raced to the scene. The Marine Mammal Stranding Center said 2 of the dolphins died shortly after and were spotted with the remaining 6 dolphins, and their conditions all found to be rapidly deteriorating. The decision was made to humanely euthanize the dolphins to prevent further suffering. Now, yesterday on Twitter, I saw this Fox News story. The hearings on the beached whales continues. Republicans take aim at offshore wind as whale deaths surge. A group of House Republicans introduced a congressional resolution yesterday expressing concern about the potential impacts of offshore wind and calling for an immediate moratorium. The resolution, introduced by Jeff Van Drew, as well as Chris Smith of New Jersey, Andy Harris of Maryland, Scott Perry, Pennsylvania, Anthony D'Esposito of New York, would establish a sense of Congress that the full environmental and impact economically of offshore wind development must be further studied. Until such an investigation is conducted, the resolution would call on the federal government to halt all such projects. So, I don't know. Is it me? Again, I just look at news. I'm just a guy looking at news. Is it me? Is this happening a lot more? Or no? Marine mammals washing ashore, is that happening a lot more? Is there a reason for it? Can we conclusively say why? Can't. Is it happening more? Yes. Why? We don't know. But the Biden administration wants you to know it has nothing to do, and Democrats want you to know, Phil Murphy of New Jersey wants you to know, it has nothing to do with wind farm development. That they're sure of. Full steam ahead. Again, none of these stories are related. They're just all happening simultaneously, and we're all just supposed to, I don't know, keep shouting Trump indictment, Trump indictment. How about this? Hunger rising amid inflation. Study finds nearly 25% of Americans are food insecure, as debt continues to rise, by the way. Almost 25% of American adults are food insecure, a jump of about 5 percentage points from a year earlier, as the double whammy of high inflation and the end of the pandemic benefits squeeze more household budgets. It's an interesting thing to write from CBS News Money Watch as the end of pandemic benefits. The end. All right, so this may prove what Steve Moore was saying, that the sugar high is still in our system. I guess this is news to me, if true. There are still people collecting pandemic-related benefits? Is that right, Fast Eddie?
As far as I know, I mean, what they're saying, yeah.
Is there anybody, I'm not calling anybody out or trying to make anybody feel bad, but is there anybody that knows of someone? I'm just curious. If you could contact this show either via email or social media, however you'd like, and you don't have to give me names, and I will never out you or anybody else, because I remember early on during the pandemic, I remember a guy in particular from Indiana. He was an Indiana listener, and he wrote me and said that he said, Chris, I hate to say this, but I just got to say this to somebody. My son is an able-bodied 20-something, and he has been collecting a huge government subsidy on for COVID, and he's lived rent-free for, I can't remember how long he said. It was at least, I know it was more than a calendar year, that his son was living very, very well, rent-free, in a condo or a townhome or something. Doesn't pay rent. Kept collecting a check. Could work. In fact, I feel like he said he might have even said he was working. But anyway, the point was he wasn't paying rent. He was basically living for free off of this subsidy and was living high on the hog. And I guess this is still, maybe it shouldn't come as a surprise to me. I guess it's still going on. I had a very interesting conversation with a gentleman who sponsors my podcast. He's in the medical insurance business. He said, Chris, all these people that were getting Medicaid dollars as a subsidy from the government through COVID, that's all drying up just now. So there are tons of people, I didn't know this, like thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people who have been getting government subsidies to pay for their health insurance under the auspices of COVID through Medicaid. And they've still been working. And the government, he tells me, I didn't know this. No idea. The government hasn't been asking. So people that have been drawing Medicaid health insurance premium coverage, that is, Medicaid is covering their health insurance premium every month. This has been going on now for 3 years. So in that instance, and I didn't know this, it's just now, I guess as of like this month, it's about to dry up. And as it turns out, I guess if I got this right, there's going to be a tax levied on that money, I think as income, if memory serves. So a bunch of people are about to get socked with taxes, and they're about to start paying health insurance premiums for the first time in years. So this health insurance sponsor of mine said, dude, what's coming for a lot of people with their health insurance who've been living high on the hog, getting this thing subsidized? They're about to get walloped, and they don't even know. So that's just a heads up. If there's anybody in this audience who's been drawing a government benny under the auspices of COVID to pay for your health insurance, apparently that's about to go away, and hold on tight. By the way, not for nothing, Obamacare, not getting cheaper, he tells me. Apparently Obamacare rates are going through the roof, too, if you're somebody that's on the government-run, what did they call that? Affordable Care Act, ACA. Surprise, that's not getting any cheaper. Anyway, back to the story. The rise in food insecurity comes as more households are struggling to pay their typical bills amid grocery costs that have surged 20% in 2 years and rents that have increased 13%. Inflation surged last year to a four-decade high, just as several pandemic-related benefits come to an end. Well, they keep writing this in this story, so that must mean that's true. 3 years of benefits just now coming to an end. Okay. I don't know who's collecting them. I know I haven't seen any of these bennies sloshing around. Well, I guess maybe we were just dumb, Fast Eddie. We didn't take advantage of the gravy train. I don't know who the hell these people are living high on the hog. Maybe that answers my question. I've been so frustrated at what just does not make sense in all the years that I've been covering the news. I cannot compute how it is that consumer debt is going through the roof. Everything costs a fortune, and yet Everybody's spending money like crazy, and nobody seems to be working. It like these things do not compute. It's never made sense. And all I keep hearing is government benefits. And I keep saying, for who? I don't know unless people are doing it and it's in secret. I don't know people. I guess maybe people don't share this with you. Maybe this is not something people broadcast. But I can honestly tell you, I don't know of anybody in my life, to my knowledge, that's collecting government benefits under the auspices of COVID today. But apparently there must be a lot of people. Do you know anybody?
Personally, no. And could this have been something rammed through in the omnibus bill or in the Inflation Reduction Act? Because I know May is when they said it's all ending, like the pandemic is over. Of course.
Maybe I don't know if it's state funds. I don't know if it's all this, a lot of states are sloshing around in supposed COVID relief money. I don't know if states are giving them these bennies. Food insecurity can be a canary in the coal mine for people who are experiencing high levels of hardship and aren't able to meet their household needs, said Cassandra Martincheck, a research associate at the Center for Labor, Human Services, and Population. She added, it's a household economic condition where folks don't have enough resources to have enough food for their family or an active or healthy life. A survey of 8,000 adults in December found that 1 in 6 adults relied on charitable food, such as free groceries or meals. By comparison, 1 in 8 adults relied on food charities in 2019 prior to the pandemic. Even though this is what I mean, even though more Americans are finding jobs and the labor market remains strong, wages aren't keeping up with inflation, which is chipping away at household purchasing power, and food stamp enrollment remains high. 42.6 million people received food stamps in December. 15% higher than prior to the pandemic. Almost 2/3 of adults say their grocery costs have increased a lot in the last year, more than the share of Americans who said they were feeling the impact of higher gas prices, rents, childcare, health insurance, the analysts found. Adults whose grocery costs increased a lot were about twice as likely as other adults to be food insecure. Food insecure households may have to make really tough decisions about whether they can pay their rent and their groceries, or life-saving medication and their groceries. Aside from people who are food insecure, there are roughly 10% of Americans who are anxious about their ability to pay for food. These are folks who feel they are but one emergency away from being able to meet their food needs. And food insecurity, writes CBS News, may only worsen in 2023 due to the impact of cuts to the food stamp program. More than 30 states cut their food stamp benefits in March due to the expiration of a pandemic program to provide more funding to the SNAP program. Well, from what I hear, every state in the union is awash in this COVID money, so I can't imagine why there would be any state cutting their SNAP benefits. I mean, if you're awash in this COVID money, is that not exactly what it's supposed to go for? Drug shortages could end up in... What was that?
Oh, no, this just goes back. I just remember so vividly your conversations with Sonny Perdue, Trump's agriculture secretary.
Yep.
I remember actually my wife and I volunteering to get the food out that he was talking about during COVID, saying that the supply chains will be strong. Rural communities and cities like Philadelphia will be taken care of, and they were. So I don't understand. So I'm guessing the Biden administration thinks money is the solution and not actual food, right?
Well, your guess is as good as mine. Drug shortages, this from Axios, are the worst they've been in a decade, according to the American Society of Health System Pharmacists, a sign of how much we rely on low-margin manufacturers with limited capacity for basics, like inhalation drug albuterol and some common cancer treatments. By the way, they buried the lead in this. A sign of how much we rely on low-margin manufacturers. Want a translation there? China. Why doesn't Axios say that? What is it? A sign of how much we rely on low-margin manufacturers. You mean China, Axios. Oncology drugs have been hit particularly hard in recent months, putting experts on high alert. Chemotherapy drugs. Several generics produced by an Illinois-based pharmaceutical company shuttered operations due to bankruptcy. How do you go bankrupt in pharmaceuticals these days? And anyway, they go on to list several drugs. A survey of health systems found that a lot of bladder cancer treatment drugs have been rationed or not available at all. Manufacturing delays, quality problems blamed for the shortages, but that's often because there aren't many alternative sites to pick up the slack. Okay, so we have a drug manufacturing and a drug supply problem in the country. This is the same as baby formula. So the running theme here is, one, supply chains are still broken. Two, those that are making the things we need and consume are either China or like one factory in the United States. That seems to be a problem. Perhaps we need to discuss diversification. And then Captain Kangaroo, our Treasury Secretary, says the government may need to start doing some more backstopping of deposits. Oh, well, so much for that whole SVB's a one-off. Captain Kangaroo making remarks yesterday that, sure, we may need to step in and save some more banks, but don't sweat it. Everything's fine. In fact, she used the opportunity to scare the hell out of everybody to say, that's why it's very important that we continue to raise the debt ceiling, which is just an amazing thing. Comments come in the wake of several bank failures, most notably Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. Customers worried that liquidity problems caused by duration risks by the bank's holdings could cause similar institutions not to be able to meet their deposit requirements. A report Monday from Bloomberg indicated regulators are studying a way to guarantee all deposits. One idea that has been floated has been to offer a tiered pricing system in which depositors would pay extra to guarantee deposits of over $250K. Oh, so a little added fee by the bank to make sure, hey, you want to put more than $250,000 in our bank? You'll need to pay an added fee to make sure if we totally collapse, your deposit will be covered. What a time. Anyway, Captain Kangaroo says, we may need to bail out some more banks, but don't sweat it. Everything's fine. Just keep printing money and raising the debt ceiling. That would be too upsetting to the economy, she says. If those rascally Republicans don't raise the debt ceiling, now that would cause a real problem. But don't sweat it. Everything's fine. So that's your report, ladies and gentlemen. Dead sea mammals, churches on fire, food insecurity. Just another day in Biden's America. Hey there, it's Chris, back on the phone with my dentist and friend Bob Spinato at Williamsburg Dental in Broomall, Pennsylvania, just off the Blue Route with new technology. You have not just new associates, but they brought new technology into the business to make it a little easier for patients.
Yeah, it's a very exciting time in dentistry. We have now introduced a three-dimensional x-ray called a CBCT scan in our office, which allows us to diagnose and things earlier for patients. My daughter is placing a lot of implants in the past that referred out. It's now being done in-house. And we also, we've been using dental or computer scanners for taking impressions for crowns for about the last 2 to 3 years. We now have introduced the next step, which is a milling machine, and we can now make crowns in the office. Things can be completed in the same day as opposed to having a temporary crown put on and 3 weeks later coming back and having a permanent crown put on. It's really a game changer, and it's a time saver for our patients to not have to make multiple visits to the office.
Pick up the phone or go online, make that appointment, 610-353-2700 or williamsburg-dental.com. Karine Jean-Pierre, I guess it was Monday at the White House. Pepe Le Pew has behind her the cast of Ted Lasso, because that's what they do now at the White House. They bring in celebrities to distract you from the real news that I've just gone through. The White House decides, you know what we can do to avoid having to face media questions of any kind? Let's bring in famous people to talk about causes. That will take up the press briefing time, and it gets us out of having to talk about anything that's really happening. And they've done this with how many people in just this short 2 years? Right off the top of my head, who comes to mind? Matthew McConaughey was one. There was the Korean pop band. That was another one.
Olivia Rodrigo was the first one with the vaccine.
That's right.
The young singer.
Yes, the young singer. And then I think there are a couple of others. But now they bring in the cast of Ted Lasso. Jason Sudeikis, who I like a lot. Very funny guy, former SNLer. And I watched most of the first season of Ted Lasso and thoroughly enjoyed it. Very, very funny show. Thought it was a great. Now, I have not watched the second season. I don't know. Do you watch it, Fast Eddie?
Nope.
Okay. It's an Apple TV show. And I started watching it on a plane, I think. And it's fine. I mean, it's cute. It was, at least the first season was cute. And then I start seeing Sudeikis is winning trophies and Emmys and critically acclaimed and all of this. I'm like, wow, okay, this show, the critics really love it. And then I see yesterday the cast of Ted Lasso shows up at the White House to discuss mental health. And I'm like, huh? This is a show about a goofy guy from the Midwest who goes to coach a professional soccer team in England. He's like Ned Flanders. The character of Ted Lasso is like a Ned Flanders guy. Hi, diddly-ho! Like he's ebullient and peppy, almost to the point of naivete, and there's kind of a cynical world all around him. He works for a really cynical, kind of mean-spirited team owner. They're basically trying to tank the team, so they hire a football player from a football coach from the Midwest that they think is going to come and just completely tank their soccer team because he doesn't know what he's doing. But he thinks it's like a legitimate opportunity, and he's, and so he's just full of vim and vigor and pep, and he's trying to talk everybody up, and everybody thinks he's a loser, but he doesn't know it. Apparently, into season 2 now, we get the dark side of Ted Lasso. So, of course, what was a really charming show is now turned totally depressing, I guess. And now I certainly will not watch it because I guess Ted Lasso now has sunken into a terrible fit of despair in season 2. And we learn that this ebullient, happy, optimistic guy has now collapsed into a mental state that of depression or despondency or whatever. And I thought, let's download that right away. I get it. I'm going to start getting show fact checkers. Folks, I haven't seen it, but that's the thrust of it. The show is now focused on mental health, okay? And so this is why they've brought in the cast of Ted Lasso. They want to call attention to mental health at the White House. Well, this guy what's his name, this reporter, this African reporter? I forget his name again.
Simon Atiba.
Not Dave McCormick. So I've done that twice now already. I'm starting to sound more and more like my grandfather every day. What's that fella's name? Simon Atiba, thank you. He's been on Tucker a couple of times already addressing this. This Simon Atiba sits, 4 or 5 rows back from Pepe Le Pew, and he's been trying to get called on, and she won't acknowledge him. He has real questions to ask her. Sitting, I think, directly behind him, if I'm not mistaken, is James Rosen. That's why I bring this up. So James is coming up, and I can't wait to talk with him about this exchange. Because in comes the cast of Ted Lasso, and Simon, I think, loses his mind because he's like, are we seriously? Like, the world's on fire, and you guys bring in some Apple Plus show cast to talk about some... He has it. He's popped. I think he popped his top and was like, you won't call on me for any legitimate question, and now you're going to use up all our time with celebrity people? I'm not having it. And so he just lets her rip, and the press corps, his colleagues, turn on him. Start screaming at him. Hey, you shut up. Karine Jean-Pierre brought in celebrities to talk about an issue. How dare you? You shut up, you. It's the most extraordinary thing. It gets so crazy at one point that Pepe Le Pew turns around to the cast of Ted Lasso and says, this isn't working out. Perhaps you should go. And they leave. They never, because this Simon Atiba guy just filibusters. He's not having it. Of course, it ends with a stern lecture from Pepe Le Pew. Here's some of it. We won't play it all, but here's how it began.
Yeah, right. You're right. You're here for me. Refer me. No. No, that's not. We're not doing this. We're not doing this. We're not doing this. We're not doing this.
From across the room, you've been discriminating against me and discriminating against some people in the briefing room. And I'm saying that this is the U.S. This is not China. This is not Russia. This is not Russia.
Okay.
What you are doing, you are making a mockery of the First Amendment.
Decorum, please.
It's been 7 months. You've not called on me. You've done my messages. I'm saying that that's not right. That's not right.
Fun times. Welcome, guys. Welcome to the press briefing room. Okay.
This is not right.
Sir, let it go. Let it go.
Are we going to behave?
Are we going to behave?
While many folks...
You should respect the First Amendment.
Decorum, please. Simon.
Decorum!
Sorry to our guests. We apologize.
Oh, very sorry to the Hollywood celebrities in the room. Oh, very sorry. Greetings and salutations, 1,000 apologies to the Hollywood actors who have shown up in the White House press briefing. Oh, says members of the press, we're so sorry to have upset the Hollywood set in the press briefing room. They're furious at Simon Atiba. He says, what is this, Russia? Is this China? I've been here 7 months. You haven't called on me once, and now you're bringing in showbiz people? What the hell? He's blown his gasket. I don't blame him. And what do his colleagues do? Shut up, you! Decorum, you! Celebrities in the building, man! Have you forgotten yourself? And of course it closes with Pepe Le Pew scolding the room. I'll end this briefing right... So she sends the Ted Lasso people out. I think that's hilarious. Simon Atiba, this went on now for 5-6 minutes. And she finally just tells the Ted Lasso people, sorry, this ain't happening, and they leave the room. And that brings Pepe Le Pew to her stern warning for everyone. Hey, did you bring enough gum for everyone? Because if you didn't...
As you all know, many of you know, this is the White House press briefing room, a historic room, a room that should have decorum, a room where folks should respect their colleagues and respect the guests that are here. And I understand that there's going to be give and take. That's the way the press briefing has gone for decades before me. And I will always, always respect that. But what I will not appreciate is disrespecting your colleagues and disrespecting guests who are here to talk, who were here to talk about an incredibly important issue, which is mental health. And what has just occurred this last 10, 15 minutes is unacceptable.
Unacceptable.
It is unacceptable. So we're either going to continue the briefing or we can just end the briefing right here.
No!
Well, then let's go.
No! Oh, no, please. Anything but that, Mama Karine. Don't end the briefing. Who's going to lie to us today if you leave? Oh, no. We'll make him shut up. Don't leave. Oh, no. Anything but ending the briefing. These people are just the worst. Just the worst. The dregs of humanity. The White House press briefing room. Meanwhile, holding a press conference yesterday was Mexico's president, who says the United States cannot talk about human rights with Julian Assange being detained, cartel violence, Joe Biden bombing the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, or democracy while arresting the leading presidential candidate, Donald Trump. Wow. Okay, so that's Mexico's presidential press briefing yesterday. We had Ted Lasso. The dude from Africa's right. He blew his stack. He's like, what is this, Russia? What the hell is going on? You haven't called on me in 7 months. I have real questions, and you bring up Apple Plus stars? And what does our press corps do? Shut up, you! Celebrities in the building! Have some decorum! It's upside down world. MyPillow.com. You know the jingle. There's MyPillow 2.0. It's out now, folks. I just slept on it again last night. You've been hearing for, 20 years, Mike has been making MyPillow. He's been making the commercials, and you wouldn't have thought you could improve upon a pillow, really. But the truth of it is, he's not only improved on the patented adjustable fill, but now he has a brand new fabric and a new temperature-regulating thread to keep you cool. If you sleep hot, and I kind of do, this is the softest, smoothest, coolest pillow, and I mean temperature cool, that you will ever own. And here's the deal. Mike is giving you a buy one, get one free offer with my name, Chris Podcast. When you use that as a promo code, Radio Listener Square, if you go to mypillow.com and click on that Radio Listener Square, enter Chris Podcast, and you will get one free when you order a MyPillow 2.0. Chris Podcast, by the way, gets you up to 66% off everything on the site at mypillow.com. Maybe it's the coffee. I am sipping MyPillow. My coffee it's called, not my pillow. It's my coffee. It's delicious. Enjoying it right now. Thank you, Mike. He's got light roast and dark roast versions there, so try his coffee. Listen, support a great patriot, support great American companies like MyPillow and the employees that work there up there in Minnesota. It's a fantastic customer service-oriented company at MyPillow. Every product that you buy from them is a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee if for some reason you don't like it, but they're really high-quality stuff. I mean, the slippers themselves, I sent slippers to a member of the staff. My wife has the MyPillow slippers. I sent pillows. I sent a couple of dog beds. Dean, my dog, is on a MyPillow dog bed, which he loves. Robes and bath towels, whole bath sheets, those great big absorbent bath sheets, if you like those. These Giza Dream Sheets we sleep on are like sleeping on a cloud. You will love these products. I just hope you go to MyPillow.com. Use my promo code, ChrisPodcast. Get that buy one, get one on the new MyPillow, or up to 66% off every product. MyPillow.com, promo code ChrisPodcast. Boy, it's a pleasure when we can lean on the absolute best analysis, I think, when it comes to legal analysis, constitutional analysis of the law out there. There isn't anybody better than Alan Dershowitz, Harvard Law School professor emeritus, New York Times best-selling author. There's a brand new read. There's a lot of great stuff to read. And his book, Get Trump, The Threat to Civil Liberties, Due Process, and Our Constitutional Rule of Law, is one of them. He's also out there on Substack. Alan Dershowitz, it's great to see you, Professor. Thanks for coming in today.
Well, thank you. The timing is very good with what's happening with Trump and the attempts to get him. They won't work. I think they may backfire, but it will certainly cause a lot of headlines over the next week or so until they finally pull the trigger and indict him and then arrest him.
May I play a little bit of Van Jones yesterday on CNN?
Sure.
Here's what he had to say about this DA in Manhattan versus other pending litigation versus Trump and how he sees this unfolding. Take a listen.
The first charges against a former president and the historic nature of it shouldn't come from a local prosecutor who ran as a Democrat and was elected, that the politics of this could overshadow other cases, like we know the DOJ case that is going on. What do you say to that?
Well, if anybody is a Republican and they have been afraid that there's some conspiracy, some well-organized conspiracy among progressives, they can relax now, because you would not start with this charge. You would start with the charge in Georgia, where he was interfering with elections. You would start with the charge that he was helping the insurrectionists in a coup. You wouldn't start with an 8-year-old porn star payoff. So this is proof, if nothing else, that the progressives are not very well organized. This is not the one you would start with.
Yeah, Professor, he's admitting here, as a progressive, he's concerned that this is the case they're starting with. What do you say?
Well, he's absolutely right. You know, there's no coordination. The Justice Department doesn't sit down with the state district attorney or the state attorney general or the Georgia U.S. attorney and decide which is the strongest case. Let's prioritize and bring the strongest first. Each of the prosecutors has their own agenda and their own self-interest. And so Bragg is running in New York, funded by George Soros. He has to give his people something. And so he's decided to go for this Mickey Mouse indictment, which can't survive any kind of scrutiny, on the theory that if the courts throw it out, he'll blame it on the courts. But he's done his job. You know, the title of my book, Get Trump, I didn't originate that title. It came from a campaign promise by the Attorney General of New York when she ran for office, Letitia James. Her campaign promise was, I promise you, if you elect me, I will get Trump. That's where I got the title of my book from. I do not believe any of the four cases will survive scrutiny. In my book, Get Trump, I go through every one of the four cases. The Georgia case won't work because he said, find me, find, not discover, not invent, not concoct. Find means it's there. You have to look hard, and you'll find it. So that case will fail. The Florida case, although it's a very strong case legally, will fail politically because they're not going to be able to justify going after Trump and not going after Biden and not going after Pence.
That's the documents.
And the D.C. case, the document case. The D.C. case will fail because his speech, even though I don't like his speech, included the words, I want you to protest patriotically and peacefully. That's protected by the First Amendment. That's not incitement to imminent violence. So I don't think any of the four cases work. There's a lot of smoke. There's no fire. And if there is a fire in New York, it was set by an arsonist, namely the district attorney because he's made it up. He's concocted it. The theory of his case is that once he paid the $130,000 as hush money, and everybody admits he did that, he should have then put on his corporate records the real reason he paid the money, and should have said, I paid $130,000 hush money to a porn star in order so that my wife and my children and my business associates wouldn't find out about it. Has anybody in history ever done that? Of course not. You always, if you pay hush money, you dress it up a little bit. Legal fees, legal expenses. And that's what they were, of course, because he was settling a potential lawsuit that could have been very embarrassing. So I just don't think they have even a misdemeanor case. But then to try to turn that into a felony, you have to go into the depths of Trump's mind and say, look, I didn't care about my wife. I didn't care about my children. I didn't care about my business. The only reason I put this entry the way I did was to get elected president. You know, there were so many stories out there about his sexual encounters with women. One additional one would not have affected the outcome of the election. So,
yeah, and Professor, the most interesting thing about it to me is it's his own personal money. When they say it's a campaign finance violation, it's his own private personal money. It was not campaign money. I think that's being purposely confusing a lot of times in the reporting of this story.
Well, I agree with you. And Edwards, you know, Governor Edwards, when Senator Edwards, he ran for president some years ago, they went after him on a similar charge, and they were laughed out of court. Yeah. The jury immediately acquitted, and there was no case. And that's why the federal government didn't bring a campaign charge. They're the ones who should be bringing it. It's a federal election. But they decided to decline that, not to bring it, as did the predecessor, district attorney. But Bragg thinks he's smarter than all the other prosecutors. Certainly he's more ambitious. And he decided to bring it on the theory, if the courts throw it out, blame them, don't blame me.
Alan Dershowitz with us, Harvard Law School professor emeritus. His brand new book is called Get Trump, The Threat to Civil Liberties, Due Process, and Our Constitutional Rule of Law. We were talking to Andrew C. McCarthy yesterday. He said there is nothing in the Constitution that prevents a guy, even if he's convicted, which you don't anticipate he will be, but even if he is, there's nothing that would interrupt his run or even win as the next president of the United States if he chooses, yes?
That's true. He could be convicted because in New York, you know, a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich, and a petty jury might convict a ham sandwich if his name is Trump. So it's possible, but it'll be reversed on appeal. But no, he can't be prevented from running, even if he's in prison. The mayor of Boston some years ago, Mayor Curley, I think, served as mayor while he was still in prison. Certainly he served while he was convicted of a crime. He's not going to get prison time. This is not the kind of case that ever gets prison time. But if he were to be convicted, that would become a badge of courage. Look, my prediction is this: they're not going to do a perp walk because that would be too good for Trump. But they're going to have to do a photograph, a mugshot.
Oh, that mugshot!
And that's going to be his campaign.
Of course, it's going to be the greatest T-shirt button. Like it's going to be as famous as the Sinatra mugshot, Professor.
Oh, that's right. I have that hanging in my office.
I told you.
His videos with Sinatra. I love Sinatra. I try occasionally to sing his songs. But that mugshot, I remember the crime. It was for seducing somebody, as if that's a crime. But they got him for seducing somebody. Did they get the woman for seducing him? I don't know. Uh-huh. But that's his mugshot, and it became, as you know, world famous. And so with this mugshot, it'll become a collector's item.
Professor, I have heard people suggest that DeSantis, as Florida's governor, could somehow – there are two things I've heard suggested, and I don't know. You tell me. That DeSantis could step in and fight extradition on behalf of Trump, or that the Secret Service could get involved somehow and stop Trump from being transferred somewhere. What do you know about either of those?
Well, both have some elements of legal truth, but both won't happen. Trump is going to want to appear in New York. He's going to want to seem. He's just not going to want to seem evasive. There are some cases where a governor of a state refused to render the person to another state. For example, New York didn't have capital punishment, and Governor Cuomo, the original Governor Cuomo, refused to send somebody to be executed in a different state. It has to be an extreme case. That's number one. The Secret Service. The rules of the Secret Service prevail over state law, so that, for example, if they wanted to do a perp walk, or if they wanted to have him fingerprinted privately with nobody around, and the Secret Service says, no, we don't leave the president alone, the Secret Service would prevail over that. If he was sentenced to prison, that would raise a really interesting question. I remember when I had a threat on my life some years ago when I was teaching, I had 2 FBI agents had to accompany me everywhere I went. They would kick the doors open to the bathroom. And then when I taught, they would sit right in the front and be in my class. When I went to Boston Celtics basketball games, I'd have to get 2 extra seats because the FBI was sitting behind me. But it didn't influence my life directly because after a while I stopped noticing them. Some neo-Nazi had put out a contract on me. And so, and I have to tell you, the FBI agents had the greatest time. They said they'd never had a better job going to Celtics games, going to my class. They would come with me to dinner. But it was a serious matter. There was a threat on my life, so that.
I've heard people walking through the concept of Trump even in prison, and if in fact that happened, would Secret Service have to stand in prison with him?
Well, some real idiots on the Democratic side, extremists, have said he should be denied bail because if he has freedom, he'll provoke or incite a riot. Obviously, if he were in jail, there'd be more likelihood of a riot than if he were outside. But he's not going to be denied bail. That would be absolutely unheard of, even in New York. So I don't think he's going to get prison. But if he does get prison, the Secret Service would have to go with him to protect him from other prisoners.
Wow.
And people say the first time ever a former president has been indicted. That's not the really difficult question. The difficult question is the first time a presidential candidate, a man who's actually running for president. Well, Edwards was a minor presidential candidate, but Trump, he has a majority of the votes, or at least a plurality on the Republican side. He's a real candidate. He's a former president and a potential future president. And you don't go after somebody like that on these kind of Mickey Mouse charges. You better have a slam dunk case, a very strong one, before you go after a man running for president. Otherwise, you enter the territory of Banana Republic.
And so
that's what they do in Banana Republic.
Yeah, and to Van Jones' point, is he saying that if they do this first, this ridiculous charge, is he basically saying that they undercut what they feel are more substantive charges in the other states?
Yes, without a doubt. That's what he's saying, and he's right about that. But you can't control. The Democratic Party doesn't control Bragg. He's an independent person. There were probably a lot of Democrats who were whispering in his ear, no, this is not the case to bring. Let them bring something else. Maybe you can bring a case that he messed up his financials in his buildings. That would resonate with people. But, a 7-year-old with a statute of limitations of 2 years for a misdemeanor and 5 for a felony, they have to also prove because of that they couldn't arrest him and they couldn't indict him during the previous 7 years because, they didn't know where he was? Duh. He was in the White House. And you don't have to arrest somebody to indict them. You can indict them. They can be on the moon. And you indict them. And then maybe you have trouble arresting them. But the issue of a statute of limitations is the indictment, not the arrest.
Professor,
so
I hear.
I don't think they can get with the statute.
I hear rumors that the office, that colleagues of Bragg's are really pummeling him. Like, it's don't do this. Some are threatening to walk. Some have walked, as I understand it or read it. Is there any possibility he backs off this at this point, do you think?
There is, and the reason for that is a guy named Bob Costello. Bob Costello testified in front of the grand jury. They didn't call him. They were prepared to withhold his testimony, but he volunteered, and they really couldn't say no to him. And he has now put the last nail in the coffin of Cohen, of Attorney Cohen. I don't think now it would be ethical for the prosecution to call Cohen as a witness. They have to know he's lying through his teeth. They have to know that he's not trustworthy. And if they can't use Cohen, they may not have enough of a case. They can use this guy from the National Enquirer, Pecker. They can use Wiesen, whatever his name is, I can't remember his last name, who's the head of his kind of finances. And they can use Stormy Daniels. But, without Hamlet, there's no play. and of course, Cohen is Hamlet. He's the guy who claims he was there, that he was the one who made the payoffs. He was the one who Trump told to make the playoffs. If they can't use him, they're in trouble. And if they do use him, they're in trouble. He's a gift to the defense because he's so obviously motivated to lie. And he's told people in the past, including Bob Costello and others, I did this on my own. Trump didn't know about it. So when are you lying, then or now? He's the easiest person to cross-examine, and he won't come off well. So I think if he was smart, Bragg would say, sorry, we have new information. We were not aware of the Costello information. We've now decided to drop the charges. We'll continue to investigate other possible violations, but this one we're not going to prosecute. If he was smart, if he were ethical, but don't expect it to happen.
You are not a Trump voter, but you've helped defend this president in an impeachment trial. We've talked to you about that, and it's not even a matter of defending Trump as much as you're just saying legally this is dubious at best.
Right.
How do you see President Trump's future in politics, given what you've seen of his legal treatment thus far?
Well, never count Donald Trump out. Donald Trump doesn't like me particularly because in my book, Get Trump, I start by saying, as someone who voted against Trump twice, and then I end by saying, that's why I insist that my fundamental right to vote against him for the third time not be denied by improper and unconstitutional means by prosecutors. So, I'm not a Trump supporter. When I defended him in front of the United States Senate, I never mentioned the word Trump. I defended the Constitution. It was an improper impeachment. And as somebody who cares deeply about the Constitution, I would have made exactly the same argument had Hillary Clinton been elected and impeached, or if Joe Biden is impeached. So, this is not a conservative Republican supporter of Trump making these arguments. This is a liberal Democrat supporter of Biden and Hillary Clinton who's making these arguments, which means both sides hate me. And, the Republicans hate me for not supporting Trump, and the Democrats hate me for defending him. So I'm a bit on my own here, but I'm used to that.
Well, Professor, we're grateful for your honesty, sincerely. There are just so few people anymore that are just willing to call it straight, and you do. Alan Dershowitz, the book is called Get Trump, The Threat to Civil Liberties, Due Process, and Our Constitutional Rule of Law. He writes at Substack. He's on Twitter, Alan Dersh, D-E-R-S-H. Professor, thank you so much for your time, as always.
It's my pleasure. And if you get the book, it'll send a message, I think, to the district attorney that people are watching him, and he's going to be held accountable. So please buy my book.
Thank you, Professor. Good grief. Dick Van Dyke. Fascinating. You know how old Dick Van Dyke is? He's 97 years old, suffered minor injuries this morning, apparently. Who knows what he was doing? It says Wednesday morning, so I assume that's after midnight. After becoming involved in a single-car crash in Malibu. Driving a 2018 Lexus LS 500, crashed into a gate. They confirmed his injuries were minor. He received treatment for a possible concussion, bleeding from the nose. He didn't go to the hospital. A person picked him up at the crash site to bring him home. 97.
Dude.
Driving around after midnight. I mean, in some ways, I'm like, good for Dick Van Dyke. If I make it to 97... I guess you can do whatever you please. I'm impressed, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I hope, thankfully, I guess he's well, but that's really something. Anyway, we welcome in, apropos of nothing, I just thought I'd share that story with you, James Rosen, chief White House correspondent for NewsMax and author of what I'm sure is going to be a fascinating new read. Can't wait to dive into it because I'm a fan, as I know many in this audience are, of the late, great Justice Scalia. James's new book is called Scalia, Rise to Greatness, 1936 to 1986. This is basically a prequel to the public life of Justice Scalia. And James, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Good morning, sir.
Chris, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. I got a lot of questions for you. Of course, I want to talk about the book. If you've got time, I want to dive into all of it. May I start with, we were just talking about this, the kerfuffle.
I got to tell you, I know nothing about what happened to Dick Van Dyke this morning, but I too am glad that he's well. And I reviewed Dick Van Dyke's autobiography for the Washington Post, I think 12 years ago. It's still online. You can find it out there.
I mean, don't we all hope that we're out driving around and, lucid at 97?
I'm not even sure I want to live to 97, but if I do, I hope that somebody's driving me around.
Actually, you make a good point. Given the state of things, I'm not sure I want to see tomorrow, but nevertheless, just a joke. May I start from a while back, because we haven't talked in a long while. In fact, I don't remember the last time we've talked on the show. In fact, I know it hasn't been since you've gone to work for NewsMax as their chief White House correspondent. Something that was always very, very interesting about you dates all the way back to the Obama administration. We're talking 2013, and that's the very famous story that became public to everybody, reported in the Washington Post of all places, that the Justice Department extensively spied on you during your time working with Fox News. Your colleague and friend of our show, Cheryl Atkinson, is still engaged in litigation over a similar incident. Where does that stand, sort of in the pantheon of journalism and government today, in your view? How do you look back on that time?
What was true about the episode 10 years ago remains true today, which is that it was the first and only time that we know of where the U.S. government has branded or designated a working reporter a criminal co-conspirator in a violation of the Espionage Act, no less, for doing his job. At the time, when I was working for Fox News and covering the State Department, I scored a number of exclusive stories having to do with North Korea's nuclear weapons program and also the succession program for Kim Jong-un to take over, as he eventually did. And in response to that, the Department of Justice initiated a national security leak investigation. The individual who was identified as my source, ultimately to avoid the costly and debilitating pains of a trial, stood up and pleaded guilty in open court to providing national defense information to James Rosen of Fox News. Even so, I've never said one way or the other who my source was for those series of stories. But in making that designation, what happened was he had an FBI agent swear in a notarized affidavit that was submitted to a federal judge for a search warrant application, which was approved. They wanted access to not only my personal Gmails, but also to the phone records of about 20 phone lines associated with me, my cell phone, my home phone, booth phones at the White House, State Department, and Pentagon, even my parents' home line at the time on Staten Island. That was in addition to other forms of surveillance that were placed on me. And, not even Neil Sheehan, who was the New York Times reporter who in 1971 published the Pentagon Papers, 7,000 pages of classified documents tracing American involvement in Vietnam, was designated as a criminal co-conspirator by the Nixon administration. So this was a first for the Obama administration. Briefly, Chris, I was out trending my fellow celebrities, Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift, on Twitter, and it was a national case. President Obama expressed some concern about what had happened in a speech at National Defense University on counterterrorism. One interesting aspect to it is that 5 days before the Washington Post broke the story of what had happened, Attorney General Eric Holder had been testifying before the House Judiciary Committee. And he told them in response to a question on the subject, broadly the subject of prosecuting members of the media for potential violations of disclosure of unauthorized disclosure of classified information. He said, that's not something I've ever heard of or been involved in or would think would be wise policy. And within a week, it transpired that he had been involved in such a case and, in fact, had approved this unprecedented designation of a working reporter as a criminal co-conspirator for doing his job. And ultimately, the majority staff of the House Judiciary Committee produced a report concluding that the Attorney General's testimony in that regard was false and misleading. And later still, the Attorney General identified this case as his biggest regret of his tenure. But I don't think we've seen since any working reporter designated as a criminal co-conspirator simply for doing his job.
But there can be no doubt, James, I think you would concur, there can be no doubt that what happened to you may not be as public and not in the open anymore, but is still maybe a robust and healthy practice inside Washington, D.C. Do you doubt that?
I don't have the evidence to make a judgment on whether it's still going on.
Yeah.
I believe subsequent examples were in the Trump administration were discovered of reporters being the subject of these kinds of leak investigations and certain kinds of what we might call intrusive surveillance. But the designation of a reporter as a criminal co-conspirator by the government and the ratification of that by a federal judge, I think remains novel.
Stunning. It's stunning, James Rosen. By the way, his brand new book is called Scalia, Rise to Greatness, 1936 to 1986. He's the chief White House correspondent for NewsMax. I don't know how much of the exchange you saw on Capitol Hill a couple of weeks ago of Matt Taibbi and a couple of others from Substack, who have been covering the relationship between official Washington, the DOJ, and Twitter prior to Elon Musk. But a lot of the Democrats were really badgering Taibbi about his journalism and whether he was even considered a journalist, and when and how guys like Elon Musk reached out to him to work on releasing this information. What did you make of that exchange? And by the way, what you've seen from social media in collaboration with DOJ?
I can't speak to the specific exchange you're citing, but I have met Matt Taibbi out on the campaign trail. I've always had great respect for his work. He was maybe in an earlier incarnation when he was writing for Rolling Stone, kind of the inheritor of the mantle of Hunter S. Thompson, who was another journalist whom I much admired. I think the Twitter files story is an important one. Richard Nixon said to David Frost, his interviewer in 1977 after Nixon had left office, that the founding fathers would be very concerned about the extraordinary power that network television possessed at that time. And today, when we survey the media landscape and we look at big tech and we look at the various sort of almost oligarchical players in that setting, the power enjoyed by Google and Twitter and Facebook and Amazon and the others, I think dwarfs what the network television executives of 1977 possessed. And so, yes, I do think that the founders would be equally concerned today with this concentration of power. In terms of the actual revelations of what went on, as you call it, between official Washington and Twitter, concerning as they are on the surface, I think it's going to be a long time, Chris, before we fully comprehend what took place, because you're talking, we just mentioned the Pentagon Papers, which was 7,000 pages of classified documents published in the New York Times and other newspapers. The Twitter files are giant megabytes worth of information. And I await a really good, coherent narrative to be crafted out of it in book length so that we could truly understand. And I think that's going to be some time away.
One more kind of work-related question, James, and then I want to get to your book. And that is one of your colleagues in the White House press briefing room. We were talking a little about this previously. Simon Atiba yesterday, a reporter who kind of blew his stack at Karine Jean-Pierre on Monday in the briefing room. I know you're in that room every day for Newsmax.
I was seated right behind Simon.
I saw you. A lot of your colleagues, now you sat silent. A lot of your colleagues really started badgering Simon. I mean, really going after him. And I guess I would just ask you, as a matter of, okay, if you want to call it decorum or what have you, she brings in the cast of Ted Lasso. They're going to talk about mental health. It doesn't go that way. I don't know if Simon just lost his cool with it because he saw, okay, there's going to be another deal where I'm not going to get to ask a question. He says he hasn't been able to ask a question in 7 months. I don't know the man. I don't know what your relationship is with him, but what do you make of that whole exchange? Does he have a legitimate beef here?
He had and has a legitimate beef. And to a certain extent, the kind of distemper that we've seen in the briefing room in the Jean-Pierre era, and we saw a little bit of it in the Psaki era, can only be seen as a natural byproduct of the way the briefings are being run during the Biden administration, which is to say, if you stiff 4/5 of the room every day, you're going to have a largely unhappy room, and they're going to eventually let you know about it. In the case of Simon, whom I like very much, I did not think that he was going about the raising of his particular beef in the right way. Disrupting the briefing for several minutes on end and shouting about the First Amendment is just not the way to resolve a problem like this. I went 8 months without being called on by Karine Jean-Pierre, and eventually succeeded in getting a meeting and hashing it out a little bit. And there's been some progress on that front. But, no one wants to see the White House briefing room become that kind of environment. And I took grief on Twitter Monday night and into yesterday morning, Chris, for not, quote unquote, standing up for Simon Atiba. You were spied on by Obama. You should be standing up for him. He stood up for you and Karine Jean-Pierre wouldn't call on you. You're a coward. You're a stooge, so you're bought and paid for by Karine Jean-Pierre. I mean, all these insane allegations. And, as a reporter, I just have to say that my role in that briefing room is to elicit information and to report it to the viewers of Newsmax.
Well, that's right.
Nothing
You're
more,
not an
nothing
advocate.
less.
I mean, in true press forum, what you do is you sit silent. You didn't scream and yet. Now, I would have been deeply disappointed in you if you had started badgering Simon the way some of your colleagues were. You sat quiet. I mean, I think that's the appropriate thing for a guy like you in your role to do, right?
Listen,
I mean, to scream at him is quite another.
Man.
Yeah.
He's a grown man. He makes his own choices. He made his choices. He'll live with the outcomes of those choices. He doesn't really need any counsel from me as to how he goes about his job. Nor does Karine Jean-Pierre need any further grief from me beyond what I provide in the form of my questions.
May I just briefly, James? I don't mean to belabor this, but I'm just out of curiosity for those wondering, how does it go? How does it work when you go to the White House and you say, "Hey, haven't you called on me for months?" And so you get a private meeting. What do they need concessions from you? What do they want from you in order to make it acceptable to call on James Rosen exactly?
In the case of our meeting, the contents of which remain off the record, I can simply say that we did our best as two adults with one of her aides present to address concerns we each had.
Okay.
And I think we've seen some progress in the briefing room since then. With Jen Psaki, I went way back with her. And while our relationship grew heated at times, I think it was always rooted in mutual respect, dating back to her days at the State Department. One practice that might be interesting for our listeners to hear about is that the White House, and they're not alone in this, this is done in both administrations under both parties. It's done in different locales like the White House or the State Department, the Pentagon. They do want to know, heading into a given briefing, what's on your mind. They're not demanding the specific questions, but if you could give them the rough subject matters, it helps them to prepare. And very seldom is any news audience well served if a press secretary is, or anybody else responding to reporters' questions, is caught so flat-footed that they have to say, "I don't know." News is not generally made there. So it behooves you to provide the rough subject matters of what you're interested in asking about. And so that was one. Yeah. That's one thing that can be done between reporters and press secretaries and other public figures who respond to reporters' questions to make the process not only easier for all concerned, but more productive for the news consuming audiences.
I could ask you 1,000 questions. I'm going to really try to avoid it and make this my very last one, which is on.
If you want to do another segment, we could probably get up to 650 questions. So
your relationship, generally speaking, or the press's, as you observe it, with Biden himself, availability, accessibility, questions directly. Karine Jean-Pierre, we see her on TV almost every day, a lot. And people can make of that exchange whatever they want. But how about your direct access, or any of your colleagues, to Joe Biden himself?
Very little, and not even and that covers even those outlets or reporters or anchors whom one might ordinarily expect to be sympathetic to a Democratic president. There just is not a whole lot of access to President Biden. He's given very few full-scale news conferences. I think one of the things that put me in the doghouse for quite a long time with the Psaki Jean-Pierre regime was that in President Biden's news conference of January 2022, I was the only reporter who asked him about the public polling surrounding the issue of his mental fitness.
I remember that. Oh, you caught hell for that, James. You asked about his mental fitness to serve. That was considered outrageous.
About the public polling on the subject matter, which had come out that very day in Politico, which found at the time that 49% of registered voters would not agree with the statement Joe Biden is mentally fit, which is an awfully large segment of the electorate to hold such views.
Is that what sank you at the White House? Did that tick them off to the point they said no more James Rosen?
I can't speculate, but I have my own ideas about it. So yes, he's been almost entirely removed from press scrutiny. He'll take a few questions on the South Lawn, but his answers are very clipped and short. Maybe most of the times when he has a head of state into the Oval Office for what they call a pool spray, where you see the two leaders sitting by the fireplace in the Oval Office and they make some remarks and the press gets hushed out. He almost never takes questions in that setting. He even encourages the other heads of state not to take questions. And here's another new development in this regard. Increasingly, 3 recent heads of state have come to the White House, the leaders of Brazil, Germany, and Ireland, and they have not had news conferences with the president, what they call 2 and 2, where each side's news press corps gets 2 questions apiece. And that's very unusual. And it sent the leader from Brazil, President Lula, to the stakeout microphones outside on the White House driveway to answer questions from his own press corps, which had traveled from Brazil with him. And that's very unusual and almost undignified to inflict on a visiting head of state.
Send them out to the parking lot.
So it's one more way in which this administration is restricting press access to the president.
Wow. James Rosen, I thank you for all the insight. Let me pivot now to your brand new book called Scalia, Rise to Greatness. I can't wait to get my hands on it. I had the privilege to only spend one evening when he came to Philadelphia, to the Union League in Philadelphia, and had a private dinner there. He spoke to a room full of folks, and then I was privileged enough to be invited to a dinner. You talk about rapt attention. I hung on his every word. What a fascinating, ebullient guy. Having a martini, having a steak.
Do you remember anything he said?
I do. My favorite, and I was, it was several years ago, but one of the things he said that hadn't really dawned on me before was the outsized power of the courts. And he said, when this government was founded and for so many years, he said it was the House, it was the Congress that the other 2 branches were so jealous of. They were considered the 800-pound gorilla. And he spent a lot of time explaining how now 9 people in robes hold far too much power for his comfort. That stuck with me. I hadn't really considered it as a younger man.
That is part of his legacy. Scalia's very modest view of the role of judges and courts in American society. And that's precisely, he used to call it an imperial judiciary. And that's precisely why he advocated both as an academician and then later as a justice on the Supreme Court for the view that the issue, let's say, of abortion should be returned to the states where it had resided for the better part of 200 years until Roe v. Wade came along.
He also told a lovely story about the flag burning case and how he and his wife vociferously disagreed on the subject. He came down on the side of it being constitutionally protected speech to burn the flag. His wife didn't like it, and they had a bit of a tiff about it. And she would whistle your grand old flag when he'd come down for breakfast every morning.
Yes, and had the place festooned with the American flag on that basis. In Scalia Rise to Greatness, which is the name of this new book, I call it the first accurate biography of Antonin Scalia because it's the first admiring biography of Antonin Scalia. The 2 existing biographies out there were both published when he was alive. He cooperated with one extensively, the other not at all. And they both turned out in the same place, Chris, which is to say openly hostile to Justice Scalia and his legacy. And this is the first book published since his death. It makes use of a vast array of documentary and personal sources unavailable to or overlooked by the previous hostile authors. And as I say, it's the first accurate book about him because it's the first admiring one. And that includes a much deeper focus than we've ever had before on his Catholicism and the role it played in fueling his rise to greatness, and also the role of Maureen Scalia, who I'm pleased to say a number of early reviewers of the book have said, where the star of the book is Antonin Scalia, the hero is Maureen Scalia, who raised their 9 children, as the justice often said, with very little help from him. Gene Scalia, who is the son of the eldest son of Justice Scalia, prominent attorney in his own right, former Trump cabinet official, told me, "You're writing a book about my dad. I could name a number of influential Supreme Court justices. I don't think I could name a single other person who pulled off what my mom did." And so this book, Scalia Rise to Greatness, captures the first 50 years of Antonin Scalia's life, his extraordinary academic career, his service in the Nixon and Ford administrations when he helped usher in the telecom revolution, predicted the internet, and then fought to preserve the powers of the presidency after Watergate. And it ends, and then of course served as a federal judge alongside Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Robert Bork for 4 years. This book has the correspondence between Ginsburg and Scalia when they first got to know each other, intimate and sometimes hilarious. It really captures the birth and the blossoming of the famous friendship in Ginsburg's own papers, which have never been seen before. And it ends. This book ends with Antonin Scalia taking his seat on the Supreme Court.
Wow. Who do you think, if you could, I don't know, maybe you feel uncomfortable doing it or can't do it, who on the court today do you think most embodies his judicial philosophy today?
Probably Justice Clarence Thomas, who for a time was the only avowed originalist on the court alongside Scalia. It's important for our listeners to understand, if we have the time for it, Chris, what the actual legacy of Justice Scalia is in legal and therefore historical terms. Antonin Scalia, because of a kind of revolution that he ushered in judging, in the business of judging, is one of the most important Americans of the last 100 years in any discipline. When he came along as a judge and then a justice, there prevailed in the law a liberal notion called the living Constitution. This is the idea that the meaning of the Constitution or any statute passed since then should expand, should not say static, should expand to account for new phenomena that the founders could never have envisioned, such as nuclear weapons or the internet. In order to breathe this expanding life into this organism, liberal judges and justices would look beyond the text of the Constitution or a statute and look back to its legislative intent. What was said in all those House and Senate floor debates? What was printed in all of those committee reports that were generated as a given measure snaked its way through the process? Scalia stood athwart all of that. His argument was that the meaning of the Constitution when it was enacted, or any provision passed anywhere, at any time since then, doesn't change or evolve over time, that judges in their central business, which is interpreting the meaning of the Constitution and interpreting the meaning of a given statute, should be guided by the original meaning of that text, the meaning it was widely understood to have at the time. And that legislative intent is completely irrelevant. The intent was what you passed, what you voted on, what a president signed. Nobody voted on a floor debate or a committee report. And how do you find the original meaning of a constitutional provision or a statute? You look at its text. So these two concepts, originalism with textualism, as I call it, the sort of the metal detector to find the original meaning, were revolutionary in Scalia's time. And by the time he died, no less a figure than Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan, an appointee of Barack Obama, had pronounced in effect that as a result of Scalia's revolution, quote, "We are all originalists now." And again, we have to keep in mind the Supreme Court touches every area of American life. So Scalia, by changing the way lawyers argue before the Supreme Court and the way justices write their opinions and the way even lawmakers write laws, touched every area of American life, and he still does today.
I think, James, about him often when stories like Ketanji Jackson Brown Jackson, I forget her name, when she can't define what a woman is, or there's a leak on the Supreme Court, I think about him, and I'm glad he's not around to see it, to be perfectly honest with you. I think it would just sadden him deeply.
Yeah, I was glad to see that Scalia didn't live to see January 6th. I think that would have deeply, deeply dismayed him.
James Rosen, I can't wait to read this book, Scalia, Rise to Greatness. I hope we can have you back more often. We'd love to pick your brain on so many things. So thank you for all your time today.
If elected, I would serve, Chris.
Come back and see us. Chief White House correspondent at NewsMax, James Rosen. Thank you, sir.
The Chris Stigall Show podcast.